4 days ago, they were sleeping in a car. Right now, Cora Ledbetter is standing in front of a hole in her own floor holding a flashlight that cost $2 at a gas station. And her 8-year-old daughter is gripping the back of her shirt so tight, the fabric is cutting into her collarbone. Below them, stone steps disappear into cold air that smells like wet rock and old time. Below them, something worth $200 million has been waiting in the dark for longer than Cora has been alive. And nobody in the world knows it's here except a dead woman who left it for them. But we need to go back. 4 days back to a Walmart parking lot in Springfield, Missouri, to the morning everything changed. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe now because this story is going to stay with you long after it ends. The condensation on the inside of the windshield had frozen during the night. Not all the way, just enough to blur the parking lot lights into soft orange circles that almost looked pretty. If you didn't think about why you were seeing them from inside a car at 6 in the morning. Cora scraped a clear patch with her thumbnail and checked the lot. 3 other cars parked overnight, spaced apart the way people do when they don't want to be noticed. A delivery truck backing up to the loading dock. The sky going gray in the east, not sunrise, yet just the absence of full dark. Behind her in the back seat, June was still asleep. 8 years old. Brown hair that needed washing stuffed into a knit cap. Cora had found in the lost and found bin at the public library 2 months ago. Her daughter slept with her knees pulled to her chest, and a hardcover notebook pressed flat against her stomach like body armor. That notebook went everywhere. It was full of maps, hand-drawn maps of places that didn't exist. Countries June had invented with their own rivers and mountain ranges and tiny towns with names like Fern Hollow and Coppergate. She drew them with a level of detail that made Cora's chest hurt, these careful imaginary worlds, where every road led somewhere and nothing was uncertain. The Chevy Malibu was a 2006. Cora had bought it for $1,100 18 months ago with the last of her savings after the eviction, and it had become in order. Their transportation, their storage unit, their kitchen, and their bedroom. The passenger seat held 2 garbage bags of clothes. The trunk held everything else they owned, which wasn't much. Cora's CNA textbooks she refused to sell, a box of photographs, June's school supplies, a camping kettle that plugged into the cigarette lighter, baby wipes, a bag of granola bars from the dollar store. 18 months of this, 18 months of parking lot rotations, learning which Walmarts let you stay and which ones sent a security at 2 a.m. 18 months of heating water in that kettle for instant coffee, so weak. It was really just brown water splitting granola bars. So June always got the bigger half without realizing it, washing their faces with baby wipes and calling it a bath. Cora had been a CNA for 9 years, certified nursing assistant. The person who shows up at your grandmother's room at 6 in the morning and helps her to the bathroom, changes the sheets, checks the vitals, does the actual physical work of keeping sick people alive while nurses and doctors get the credit. She'd been good at it. Patients asked for her by name. She never called in sick. And then the facility closed, and the next one had a hiring freeze. And the one after that wanted someone younger. And somewhere between the third and fourth rejection, the rent came due, and there wasn't enough to cover it. Her father's life insurance should have bridged the gap. $17,000 split among 4 children, except it hadn't split evenly. Garland needed it for the dealership. Patrice needed it to close on a property. Nolan needed it for reasons he never clearly explained. They'd asked Cora to loan them her share just temporarily, just until they got back on their feet, and she'd given it because that's what family did. Because her father had raised her to believe that blood meant something. Because saying no to your own brother and sisters felt worse than being broke. They never paid it back. When she called, the calls went to voicemail. When she texted, the texts went unread. $64,000 that her siblings absorbed like water into sand. And when Cora finally stopped asking, stopped calling, stopped pretending they were going to come through, she was 3 months behind on rent with an eviction notice taped to her door, and an 8-year-old who needed to be told they were going on an adventure. That was 18 months ago. The adventure hadn't ended yet. June woke up the way she always did, quiet and careful, checking her surroundings before she moved the habit of a child who'd learned that mornings could be unpredictable. She sat up slowly, peeled the notebook off her stomach, and looked out the window at the Walmart parking lot coming to life. What state are we in today? Same one as yesterday, Bug. Missouri. Oh. June opened her notebook to a fresh page. I thought maybe we drove somewhere in the night. She hadn't. Cora hadn't driven anywhere in the night. She'd lain in the driver's seat and stared at the ceiling and done math in her head. The kind of math that never came out right, no matter how many times she ran the numbers. Gas money versus food money versus the $37 in their bank account versus the fact that June's sneakers had a hole in the left toe that was getting bigger every day. They did their morning routine with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing the same thing hundreds of times. Kettle on the cigarette lighter, baby wipes for faces and hands. June changed into her school clothes in the back seat, Cora holding up a jacket as a curtain. Both of them pretending this was normal because pretending was easier than admitting it wasn't. Granola bar split. Coffee barely warm. June ate her half in small bites, making it last the way she taught herself. And Cora watched her and felt the specific kind of guilt that belongs to mothers who can't feed their children properly. The school lunch program would cover the midday meal. Breakfast and dinner were negotiations with whatever Cora could afford, which lately meant peanut butter on bread and not much else. Mom, can I tell you something? Always. Kenley asked me yesterday where I live, like my address, for her birthday party invitations. Cora's hand stopped halfway to her mouth, the coffee cup suspended. I told her we're between houses right now because we're moving, that our stuff is in storage. June's voice was flat, practiced a lie she'd rehearsed enough times that it came out smooth. She said that sounded exciting. I said it was. There it was. The thing that could break Cora faster than hunger, or cold, or the looks from parking lot security guards. Her daughter, 8 years old, already fluent in the language of covering up. Already skilled at building a version of her life that other kids wouldn't pity. June wasn't embarrassed exactly. She was protective. She'd figured out that the truth about their situation made adults uncomfortable and kids cruel, and she'd decided on her own to manage that information. I'm sorry, June. Don't be sorry, just fix it. June said this without anger, without accusation. Just a statement of fact from a child who'd accepted the problem and wanted to move on to the solution. You always fix things, it just takes you a while sometimes. Cora drove June to the bus stop, 3 blocks from the Walmart, because the bus didn't service parking lots. Watched her climb the steps with her backpack held together by a safety pin, where the zipper had broken her too big jacket. Sliding off for one shoulder, her notebook clutched against her chest. June turned and waved from the window, and Cora waved back. And then the bus pulled away, and Cora sat in the car and allowed herself 4 minutes of crying before she wiped her face with a baby wipe and drove to St. Augustine's Women's Shelter on the south side of Springfield. She didn't stay at the shelter. They'd offered her a bed months ago, but the beds were for women who needed them more. Women with fresh bruises and restraining orders and infants too small to sleep in cars. Cora used the shelter's mailing address because a P.O. box cost money, and no employer wanted to see Walmart a parking lot Springfield MO on a job application. Sister Carmen ran the intake desk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a no-nonsense expression that softened exactly 1 degree when she saw someone she recognized. Morning, Cora. There's something for you. The envelope sat on the corner of the desk, cream-colored, the kind of heavy paper stock that cost more per sheet than Cora spent on dinner. Addressed in clean black type to Cora Ledbetter, care of St. Augustine's Women's Shelter, Springfield, Missouri. The return address read Eugenia Falk, attorney at Low Briar Hollow, Missouri. Cora's first thought was that she was being sued. Her second thought was that she didn't own anything worth suing for. She opened it, standing right there in the shelter lobby. Sister Carmen filing paperwork behind the desk, but clearly watching from the corner of her eye. The letter was one page typed professional, and it said things that didn't make sense. Dear Ms. Ledbetter, we are writing to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary in the estate of Dorothea Ann Ledbetter, your late great-aunt. Ms. Ledbetter passed away 6 months ago at the age of 93. Cora stopped. Dorothea. Great-aunt Thea. She dug through memories and came up with almost nothing. A tall woman at her father's funeral, standing at the back, leaving before the reception. Maybe one other time, a Thanksgiving at her grandmother's house 20-some years ago. A woman in the kitchen who smelled like wood smoke and didn't talk much. Her father's aunt, a former professor of something who'd moved to the Ozarks decades ago and dropped off the family radar entirely. She kept reading. Her estate has been finalized, and per her explicit instructions, her property located in Shannon County, Missouri, is to be transferred to you and your daughter. Upon completion of all legal requirements, the property consists of a log cabin structure on 38 acres of forested land with creek access. There are no outstanding debts, liens, or encumbrances. The property is free and clear. Miss Ledbetter also left a fund to cover your travel expenses should you wish to inspect the property. A check fell out of the envelope when Cora unfolded the second page. $1,200 made out to Cora Ledbetter, printed on paper from a bank in a town she'd never heard of. And something else fell out too. Small flat pressed between two squares of wax paper. A dried flower, 3 white petals gone ivory with age, the stem thin as a thread. Cora held it in her palm and didn't know what it was. Didn't know it was a trillium, didn't know it was a flower that only grows in shade. Didn't know her great-aunt had pressed hundreds of them over 53 years in the Ozark woods. She just knew it was delicate, and someone had taken care to preserve it. And that felt like it meant something, even if she couldn't say what. Cora Key's sister Carmen had come around the desk. You look like you've seen something. My great-aunt died. She left me a cabin. Cora heard the words, and they sounded like they belonged to someone else's story. I don't even know her. I met her maybe twice. Sister Carmen read the letter over Cora's shoulder, her hand settling on Cora's arm the way it did when someone at the shelter got good news and didn't know what to do with it. Then go find out why she chose you. Cora called her siblings before she'd had time to think about whether that was wise. Still operating on the older programming. The one that said family should know things, that sharing news was what people did when they were connected to each other. She called Patrice first from the shelter phone because Patrice was the eldest, and because some part of Cora still wanted her sister's approval even after everything. Patrice answered on the fourth ring with the voice she used when she was showing a house and didn't want to be interrupted. Cora, I'm in the middle of something. Dad's Aunt Thea died. She left me property. A cabin in the Ozarks, 38 acres. The pause lasted long enough that Cora checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Patrice came back, and the real estate agent warmth was gone, replaced by something flat and calculating. A cabin in the Ozarks. Cora, that's probably a shack with a mold problem. Those properties are worthless. Sign it over to me, I'll get it appraised and handle the sale. We'll split whatever it brings, which won't be much. She left it to me and June specifically. And you're equipped to handle a property transfer. You're living in your car, Cora. You're not in a position to manage anything. Garland's voice cut in from somewhere in the background, then louder, as Patrice put the phone on speaker. What's this about a cabin? Is she asking for money again? I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you what happened. Right. Garland's laugh had a sharp edge, the kind of sound that was supposed to make you feel small. Aunt Thea left you a cabin, the crazy lady who lived in the woods. That tracks, one mess to another. She wasn't crazy. She was a hermit, Cora. She lived alone in the middle of nowhere for 50 years. Whatever she left you is probably falling apart. Do yourself a favor and let Patrice handle it before you make another bad decision. Another bad decision. As if the homelessness were a choice she'd made, as if trusting her own family with money had been poor judgment rather than a betrayal she couldn't have predicted. Cora felt something hot and tight in her chest, the kind of anger she usually kept packed down deep where it couldn't cause trouble. I'm going to see the cabin. I'm not signing anything over. You're making a mistake. Patrice's voice went cold, the deal-closing warmth evaporating completely. But fine. Go look at your shack. When you realize you're in over your head, call me. I'll clean up the mess. Cora hung up. Her hands were shaking not from fear, but from the effort of not saying everything she wanted to say. The accumulated weight of 18 months of silence finally pressing against the walls she'd built to contain it. She picked up the dried flower from the desk where she'd set it down. 3 petals, fragile and preserved. Someone had taken the time to press this and tuck it into a legal envelope, which meant it mattered to someone, which meant maybe it should matter to her too. June's reaction when Cora picked her up from the bus stop that afternoon was the opposite of her siblings. We have a cabin. We might have a cabin. I haven't seen it yet. It could be nothing. It's not nothing. June was already pulling out a notebook, flipping to a blank page. Where is it? What county? How far? Shannon County, about 3 hours south. June had the gas station map spread across the back seat before Cora finished the sentence, her finger tracing Route 60 east, then south, on smaller roads, calculating distances with the serious focus she brought to everything. We can get there today if we leave now. We're not leaving today. I need to call the lawyer first. Call her from the road. June looked up from the map, and her eyes had something in them Cora hadn't seen in months. Not hope exactly, not yet, but the space where hope might fit if the world cooperated for once. Mom, we have nowhere to sleep tonight anyway. At least in a cabin we'd have walls. The logic was unassailable, which was the problem with having a child who was smarter than most adults. Cora knew. They left Springfield the next morning after Cora called Eugenia Falk from the shelter phone. The attorney had a voice like gravel wrapped in warmth, the kind of voice that suggested decades of coffee and straight talk. Come on down whenever you're ready. The cabin's been waiting. I'll meet you there and bring the paperwork. The drive south took them out of a Springfield sprawl and into country that changed mile by mile, the flat commercial strips giving way to rolling hills, then deeper hills, then something that wasn't quite mountains but wanted to be. The Ozarks rose around them in forested ridges, the road cutting through limestone bluffs, streaked white and gray creeks running alongside the highway in water so clear you could see the gravel bottom from the car. June navigated with the map unfolded across her lap, calling out turns and distances with a seriousness that made her sound like a tiny air traffic controller. She documented everything in her notebook. Mile markers and county lines and the names of creeks they crossed, and the way the trees changed from scrubby roadside growth to real forest oaks and hickories and pines, crowding the ridgelines. Mom, look at that. She pointed at the bluff face where water seeped through the rock in thin silver lines feeding ferns that grew in the cracks. The water comes out of the inside of the mountain. That means there are caves. Probably. The Ozarks are full of them. Do you think there are caves on our land? I don't know, Bug, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But June was already drawing a map of their property based on nothing but imagination, complete with cave entrances and creeks and a cabin in the center, with smoke coming from the chimney. Cora watched her in the rearview mirror and felt something loosen in her chest, some knot that had been wound tight for months. Her daughter was excited about something real for the first time in a long time, and Cora didn't want to ruin that by being cautious. But she also couldn't afford to let either of them build expectations that might collapse. They met Eugenia Follock at a gas station in Eminence, the nearest town to Briar Hollow. The attorney was 72, built like someone who split her own firewood, with white hair cut short and practical, and hands that shook slightly when she held the paperwork, but were steady when she shook Cora's hand. You look like your father. Eugenia studied Cora's face with an openness that felt almost uncomfortable. Thomas had the same jaw, same way of standing, like he was braced for bad news. You knew my dad. Thea talked about him. She talked about all of you in her way, which was never much at once, but added up over the years. She paid attention from a distance. Eugenia knelt down to June's level, the way people do when they actually want to see a child, rather than just acknowledge one. And you must be June. Thea would have liked you. She was a scientist, always measuring things, always asking why. They signed the papers at the gas station counter. Cora's signature, jagged from nerves, and then followed Eugenia's truck down roads that got progressively smaller and less paved. County highway to gravel to dirt to a track through the forest barely wider than the Malibu branches scraping both sides. This is where we are going to live. June's voice was uncertain for the first time, the reality of remote settling in as the trees closed overhead. Let's just see it first. The track curved around a limestone outcrop, and the forest opened into a clearing, and Cora stopped the car because she couldn't drive and process what she was seeing at the same time. The cabin sat in the center of the clearing like it had grown there. Two stories of oak logs to a deep amber, the kind of color that takes decades of sun and rain to produce. A green metal roof pitched steep against the snow, clearly maintained, no rust, no sag. A stone chimney built from creek rock fitted together with such precision, the mortar lines were barely visible. A porch that wrapped the front and one side, the railing carved with patterns. Cora couldn't make out from the car, but could tell were deliberate hours of someone's careful work. Behind the cabin, the Ozark ridges stacked against each other, all the way to the horizon. Dark green forest and pale limestone bluffs, and the sky so wide it looked like a different sky than the one above Springfield. This was not a shack. This was not a mold problem on worthless land. This was a home someone had built with their hands and maintained, with the kind of devotion that showed in every straight roof line and oiled hinge and swept porchboard. June made a sound in the back seat, small and sharp, like someone had pressed on a bruise she didn't know she had. Eugenia pulled alongside and rolled down her window. Thea built this herself. Took her 3 summers living in a tent while she worked. She maintained it every year right up until the last few months. Solar panels on the south slope, well pump in the kitchen wood stove for heat and cooking. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Cora got out of the car on legs that didn't feel entirely reliable. June was already out, standing in the clearing with her notebook forgotten at her side, just looking. The air smelled like pine resin and creek water, and something Cora couldn't name. Something that was maybe just the absence of exhaust fumes and dumpster heat, and all the smells that came with living in a parking lot. Mom? June's voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, it's real. Eugenia handed Cora a key brass worn smooth by decades of fingers. Welcome home, Miss Ledbetter. The door opened into a main room that smelled like wood smoke and dried herbs, and the particular stillness of a house where someone has recently stopped living. The wood stove sat against the far wall, black iron, cold but clean. Shelves lined with books and mason jars. A kitchen area with a hand pump at the sink, a wooden table built for two, stairs leading up to a second floor. Everything orderly, intentional, the home of a person who didn't own anything by accident. On the mantel, above the stone fireplace, three small frames held three dried flowers behind glass. Three white petals, each ivory with age, identical to the one that had fallen from Cora's envelope. Trilliums, though. Cora still didn't know the name. She stood in front of them, and something in her stomach turned over slowly. The feeling you get when a pattern starts to emerge, but you can't see the full shape yet. Eugenia left after walking them through the basics. The hand pump needed priming. The wood stove draft opened left. The solar panels charged a battery bank in the closet that powered lights and the small refrigerator. She'd come back in a few days with supplies. For now, there was food in the pantry and firewood stacked under the porch overhang. June found her room upstairs, a small bedroom under the eaves with a window that framed the ridgeline like a painting. She stood in the doorway and didn't say anything for a long time. And when Cora came up behind her, she saw that June was crying. Silent tears rolling down her face while she stared at the narrow bed with its faded quilt and the nightstand with its kerosene lamp and the window with its view of mountains she'd only ever seen in library books. It's mine. It's yours, Bug. Nobody can make us leave. Nobody can make us leave. June set a notebook on the nightstand, took off her shoes, climbed onto the bed, and pressed her face into the pillow. Her shoulders shook for maybe a minute. Then she sat up, wiped her face with both hands, and opened her notebook to the map she'd drawn in the car. I need to fix this. I got the proportions wrong. That was June. Feel it, process it, get back to work. She'd learned that rhythm from Cora, who'd learned it from necessity. And watching her daughter apply it to something joyful rather than desperate was a kind of medicine Cora hadn't known she needed. The first 3 days were a process of learning the cabin's rhythms. Morning light came through the easter windows at an angle that woke them gently, not the harsh fluorescent flash of parking lot security. Water from the well tasted like cold stone clean in a way that made city water seem like an afterthought. The wood stove heated the main room evenly and quickly. Once Cora figured out the draft and the smell of burning oak became the smell of home faster than she expected. Hazel Combs showed up on the second morning. 78 years old, white hair under a faded ball cap, rubber boots, carrying a pot of stew in both hands, and walking up the track like the half-mile hike from the nearest road was nothing. "You're Thea's people." "I'm Cora. This is June." Hazel set the stew on the porch railing and studied them both with blue eyes that were sharp and clear, and not at all what Cora expected from a woman pushing 80. "Thea told me you'd come eventually." Not those words exactly. She said she'd left the place to someone who deserved it, and that sooner or later they'd find their way here. Hazel sat on the porch steps without being invited, the easy comfort of someone who'd sat on these steps many times before. "I owe that woman my life. Copperhead got me in the cuff in 81, and Thea carried me 4 miles to the road on her back. 4 miles uphill with a woman on her back and the snake bite kit in her teeth. She was 53 years old. Toughest person I ever met, and I include my first husband, who was a coal miner." June sat down next to Hazel like they'd known each other for years. "Did you come here a lot to visit her?" "Every week for 40-some years. We weren't friends exactly. Thea didn't do friends, but we were something. She showed me every plant on this mountain and what it was good for, and I brought her groceries and library books and kept my mouth shut about her business, which is the highest form of respect in these parts." Hazel stayed for 2 hours. She showed Cora how to prime the pump properly, pointed out the trail to the creek, identified the bird sounds coming from the forest. Cedar waxwing, pileated woodpecker, Carolina wren. She told them which neighbors could be trusted and which ones talked too much, and where to find the best blackberries in July. And before she left, She touched the framed trilliums on the mantel with a gentleness that told Cora these flowers meant something specific. She pressed them everywhere. Books, letters, window sills. Always trilliums, always the white ones. You know what's particular about trillium? Hazel looked at Cora. It only blooms in shade. Full sunlight kills it. It needs the dark to grow. On the third evening, June was mapping the cabin's interior with a piece of string she'd cut to 1 foot lengths, measuring walls and doorways and marking everything in a notebook with her usual precision. Cora was downstairs, replacing a cracked pane in one of the kitchen windows. A job that required putty and patience and gave her hands something to do while her mind tried to accept that this was real. That they lived here now, that the parking lot was 3 hours and a lifetime behind them. Mom. June came down the stairs with her notebook open and her forehead creased in the specific way it creased when her numbers didn't add up. Something's wrong with the east wall. Wrong how? I measured the outside of the cabin along the east side, 44 feet. Then I measured the inside rooms along the same wall. The main room is 22 feet. The pantry is 8 feet. The closet is 4. The wall thickness should be about 10 inches for log construction, so 2 walls is less than 2 feet. June held up her notebook where she'd drawn a diagram with measurements labeled. That's 34 feet and some inches inside plus less than 2 feet of wall. But the outside is 44 feet. There's almost 10 feet missing. Maybe the bathroom takes up some of that. The bathroom is on the west side, Mom. I already counted it. June tapped her notebook. 10 feet of space that isn't in any room. That's not insulation. That's not wiring. That's a whole space that doesn't exist on the inside. Cora set down the putty knife. She walked the main room's east wall, running her hand along the logs, feeling for seams or gaps. Solid. She knocked in several places. Solid, 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 and then, near the fireplace, a sound that was different. Not hollow exactly, but thinner, as if the wall behind the logs wasn't backed by earth or more wood, but by air. The stone fireplace was massive, built from creek rock in pieces so heavy. Cora couldn't imagine how a woman working alone had placed them. She'd admired it every evening as the fire burned away. The stones fit together with barely any mortar, showing the warmth they held and radiated hours after the flames died. Now she looked at it differently. Her fingers traced the stones, pressing here and there, feeling for anything that gave. June worked the other side, methodical, starting from the bottom left and moving up and across in a grid pattern, because that was how June did everything. Mom, look at this. June was pointing at the stone near the floor, half hidden by the firewood stack. Carved into its surface, so shallow you'd miss it unless you were looking from exactly the right angle, was a small 3-petal flower. The same flower that was pressed in the frames on the mantel. The same flower that had fallen from the lawyer's envelope. A trillium cut into creek rock by someone with a steady hand and a lot of patience. June pressed it. The stone moved maybe half an inch inward and something clicked behind the wall. Not loud. The kind of click that belongs to a mechanism designed to work for a long time, metal on metal, precise and oiled. Then the floor moved. In front of the hearth. A section of a stone that Cora had walked across 100 times in 3 days, separated from the rest of the floor, along a line so fine it had been invisible under the accumulated dust of years. 4 feet square. Perfect edges. It lifted on some hidden counterweight, slow and smooth, and below it were steps. Stone steps, narrow and steep, cut directly into bedrock, descending into darkness that was cool and dry and smelled like limestone, and something Cora couldn't name, but that made the hair on her arms stand up. Not fear, not exactly, more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something that was about to change the shape of your entire life. June gripped the back of Cora's shirt. Her fingers were shaking, but her voice was steady. Mom, Aunt Thea left us a map. Cora found the $2 flashlight in the kitchen drawer. tested it, watched the beam cut a pale yellow circle in the dark at the bottom of those steps. She could feel June pressed against her back, vibrating with the kind of energy that comes from being a child who has just discovered that the world contains real secrets. Not the kind you make up in notebooks, but the kind that have been waiting under your feet this whole time. She took the first step down. The stone was smooth and cold under her bare feet, and somewhere below them, in a chamber carved from Ozark limestone, by 53 years of patience and purpose, Dorothea Ledbetter's life work sat in the dark, waiting for the only family member she trusted enough to find it. The beam found the bottom after 12 steps. Cora counted them the way she counted everything now, a habit born from 18 months of tracking every dollar and mile an hour, because when you've lost control of your life, counting is the one thing you can still do. The chamber opened around them like a held breath finally released. Not a room exactly, more a natural space in the limestone that Thea had widened and reinforced over what must have been years of careful work. Wooden beams braced the ceiling at regular intervals, hand-hewn from oak. Each one fitted into notches chiseled directly into the rock. The ceiling rose to a natural dome about 10 feet at its highest point. The stone pale gray and smooth where water had shaped it over centuries before. Thea claimed it for something else entirely. Shelves lined every available wall surface. Wooden shelves built with the same precision as the cabin above each one level, despite the irregular rock behind it. And on those shelves, in the yellow wash of the flashlight beam, objects emerged from the darkness one at a time, like actors stepping onto a stage. June's hand tightened on Cora's shirt. Neither of them spoke. The silence down here was different from the silence of the cabin, which still had wind and birds and the creaking of wood. This was the silence of stone, absolute and patient, the kind of quiet that accumulates when a space has been sealed and waiting for a very long time. Cora moved the flashlight slowly along the nearest shelf. Wooden crates, each one labeled with a number and a date in handwriting. She recognized from the legal documents upstairs Thea's handwriting, small and exact, the penmanship of someone trained in scientific notation. Behind the crates, glass-fronted cabinets held objects Cora couldn't identify in the partial light. Colors caught the beam and threw it back. Blue, gold, the deep red of something that might have been garnet or might have been glass, and she had no way to tell the difference. In the center of the chamber, a desk. Oak massive, clearly carried down here in pieces and assembled underground, because there was no way it would have fit through the narrow stairway intact. Papers arranged in neat stacks. A leather-bound journal open to a page covered in columns of numbers. And on the corner of the desk, weighting down a folded letter, a single dried trillium pressed between two glass slides, the way a scientist preserves a specimen. 3 white petals. Still perfect after God knows how many years in this constant underground temperature. June let go of Cora's shirt and moved toward the desk. She didn't touch anything yet, just leaned close to the journal, reading the open page with her lips moving slightly, the way they did when she was processing information that didn't fit her existing categories. Mom, these are prices, like what things cost and what they're worth now. June pointed at a column. This says T.H. Benton Ozark landscape purchased in 1874, $600. Current estimated value duty $100,000. $2 million, Mom, for one painting. Cora set the flashlight on the desk and picked up the nearest crate. The wood was smooth and dry, preserved perfectly by the cave's constant cool air. She worked the lid off carefully. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper that crinkled under her fingers, was a canvas stretched on a wooden frame. She lifted it out and held it where the light could reach. Rolling hills under a stormy sky rendered in bold strokes that made the land feel like it was breathing. Farmers in a field, their bodies bent at angles that were somehow both exaggerated and completely true. She didn't know the artist's name until June read it from the journal. But she knew the way. You know when you're holding something that matters, that this painting was worth more than every car she'd ever slept in combined. They opened crates for 2 hours, each one a small revelation, each one pushing Cora further from the version of reality she'd been operating in and towards something she couldn't yet comprehend. Paintings by names she half recognized from a community college art appreciation class she'd taken years ago in another life. Grant Wood, Georgia O'Keeffe, a small Andrew Wyeth watercolor of a field in winter that made Cora's throat tighten because it looked exactly like loneliness felt. The cabinets held minerals and crystals, each one labeled with Thea's precise hand. Galena clusters heavy with silver, celestite formations in a blue so pure it looked artificial. Calcite the color of dark honey, translucent, catching the flashlight and scattering it into warm fragments across the cave walls. These were Ozark minerals pulled from the same limestone geology that had formed this chamber, and Thea had collected them with the trained eye of the geologist. She'd been before she left the university and came here to disappear. A separate shelf held the financial records, ledgers bound in cloth, one for each decade, documenting stock purchases that read like a history of American business. Walmart bought in the early 70s when it was still a regional chain based in Arkansas, 3 hours from where Thea sat in her cabin. Berkshire Hathaway, General Electric, Apple purchased in the 80s when most people thought computers were a passing trend. Each investment modest at the time of purchase. Each one compounding over decades with the patience of someone who understood that wealth, like geology, was built in layers over time. The final ledger, the one lying open on the desk, was dated 6 months before Thea's death. Her handwriting was shakier here, the pen pressing harder, as if her hands needed convincing, but the numbers were precise. She tallied everything. Paintings and sculptures, rare minerals and specimens, stocks and bonds and reinvested dividends, first edition books. Cora hadn't even gotten to yet, lined up on the deepest shelf in archival cases. The column ran down the page and ended in a figure that Cora read 3 times before her knees went soft and she had to sit on the stone floor. $198 million. Not the kind of number that belongs in a cave under a cabin in the Ozarks. Not the kind of number that belongs in the life of a woman who'd been choosing between gas money and dinner 4 days ago. Cora sat on the cold stone and put her hands flat on the ground on either side of her, and breathed in the smell of limestone and old paper, and the faint ghost of Thea's wood smoke that had seeped into everything she'd touched, and she tried to make the number fit inside her head. It wouldn't. It sat there too large for the space, pushing against the edges of everything she thought she knew about her life and her future, and what was possible. June was reading the letter that had been under the glass-pressed trillium. She held it in both hands, careful the way she held library books that were too old for the regular shelves. "Mom, you need to read this." The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, the ink slightly faded, but perfectly legible in the cave's preserved environment. Thea's voice came through the words with a clarity that made Cora feel like the woman was standing behind her, watching her read. "Dear Cora, I have watched your family from the edges for a long time. Wedding, funerals, the gatherings where people perform closeness without actually being close. I stood at the back and I paid attention, which is what scientists do. We observe. And what I observed was this: your siblings count, you divide. They measure what they're owed. You measure what you can give. Garland took your father's insurance money and called it a loan he never intended to repay. Patrice took a share and yours and slept fine. You gave because you believed in something they don't have the capacity to understand. And when giving cost you everything, you didn't become like them. You just became poor. This collection is 53 years of patience. I built it the way limestone builds caves, slowly in the dark, one layer at a time. I leave it to you because you understand that the value of a thing isn't what you can sell it for. It's what it makes possible. Your siblings will come. They always come when there's something to take. Stand firm. This is yours not by blood but by character. Use it to give June the life she's earned by surviving alongside a mother. Brave enough to keep going when everything reasonable said stop. With respect and recognition, Dorothea. Cora folded the letter along its creases and pressed it against her sternum. The paper warmed from her hands and didn't try to stop the tears because there was no one to perform strength for down here. Just her daughter and the dead woman's handwriting and the accumulated evidence of a life spent building something in secret for someone she'd decided deserved it. June had found a second letter in a small cedar box behind the desk. This one was addressed in Thea's hand. For June, the girl who found my cave. She brought it to Cora without opening it, and Cora read it aloud because her daughter asked her to. Because some things should be heard in your mother's voice, even when the words belong to someone else. Dear June, if you're reading this, you were curious enough to measure the walls and brave enough to press the stone. I expected nothing less. I was a geologist, which means I spent my life studying what's hidden under the surface of things. Most people walk over caves without knowing they're there. Most people miss what's right beneath their feet. You didn't. I never had children. I chose solitude because the world's noise made it hard to hear what mattered. But I watched your mother raise you from a distance, and I saw what she built with nothing. That takes more skill than anything I ever did with a rock hammer and a stock portfolio. Whatever happens with this collection, remember this. Your mother is stronger than the people who hurt her. Protect her now. She spent your whole life protecting you. Be brave, little one. The world needs children who measure walls. Your friend in the rock, Dorothea. June took the letter and folded it precisely and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, the one with the zipper that still worked. She knew me. June's voice was steady, but her chin was doing the thing it did when she was trying very hard not to cry. She knew I'd measure the walls. She knew the kind of kid who'd end up in this cabin would be the kind of kid who noticed things. Same thing. They sealed the chamber and went upstairs and sat together on the porch in the dark and didn't talk for a long time. The Ozark night was loud with insects and frogs and the distant sound of the creek running over limestone, and Cora let the noise fill the space where her thoughts should have been. Because her thoughts were too big and too fast, and she needed them to slow down before she could do anything useful with them. She had decisions to make. Immediate ones about security and legal protection, and who to tell and who to keep in the dark. Longer ones about what to do with a fortune she hadn't earned and didn't fully understand. And underneath all of it, the terrifying knowledge that her siblings would find out. Not if, when. Money this large generated its own gravity, pulled people toward it whether you wanted them close or not. The fragile quiet lasted 9 days. Hazel came by on the fourth morning with library books and the news that Betty Pruitt, who ran the Briar Hollow branch library and had a heart twice the size of her discretion, had mentioned to the Tuesday book club that Thea's niece and great-niece were settling into the cabin. Small-town information traveled the way water traveled through limestone, finding every crack, following every channel, emerging in places you didn't expect. By day 6, someone connected Thea's name to a newspaper article from 1987 about an anonymous donation of a valuable painting to the Springfield Art Museum. The anonymous donor had never been identified, but the article mentioned a reclusive collector in Shannon County. And Shannon County wasn't big enough to hold many reclusive collectors. By day 9, a reporter from the Springfield News Leader called Eugenia Folk's office asking for comment on a story they were running. The headline, when it appeared online that evening, read like a campfire tale designed to go viral. Reclusive Ozark woman leaves fortune to homeless niece and granddaughter. Cora saw the article on Eugenia's office computer, having driven to town for supplies, and felt the ground shift under her feet. The way it does during a small earthquake, not enough to knock you down, but enough to remind you that the thing you're standing on is not as solid as you thought. Her phone's a prepaid device with barely enough minutes to matter, started ringing that afternoon. Numbers she didn't recognize. A producer from a St. Louis television station, a financial advisor who'd gotten her number from somewhere. And then, threaded between the strangers, the numbers she did recognize, the ones she'd stopped calling 18 months ago when it became clear the calls would never be returned. Patrice called first. The voice was different from the last conversation. Warmer concern, the vocal equivalent of a real estate open house where everything is staged to look inviting. Cora, honey, I saw the news. I can't believe it. You must be completely overwhelmed. Garland and I have been talking, and we think it's important that family sticks together on something like this. We'd like to come up and help you sort through everything. Get proper appraisals, talk to tax people, make sure you're protected. Cora stood at the kitchen window, watching June follow the creek trail with her notebook mapping the water's path the way she mapped everything. I have an attorney, Patrice. A small-town country lawyer, Cora. This is potentially worth hundreds of millions. You need real expertise. We're family. We should handle this together. The word family in Patrice's mouth sounded like a key being fitted into a lock. Like we handled Dad's insurance money together. A pause. Then the warmth drained out fast and complete, like someone pulling a plug. That's not relevant. This is different. This is serious. And I wasn't serious. When I was sleeping in a car with your niece, that wasn't serious enough for family to stick together. Don't be dramatic. We all had problems. You had a commission check coming in every month. Garland had the dealership. Your problems and my problems were not the same kind of problems, and you know it. Fine. Patrice's voice went flat, the negotiation voice, the one she used when a buyer was being difficult and needed to be managed. Fine, Cora, play the victim. But when this blows up in your face because you don't know the first thing about managing money, don't call me asking for help. I won't. I've learned what your help costs. She hung up and stood very still in the kitchen for a long time, her hand on the counter next to the pump, feeling the cool smoothness of the wood Thea had sanded and sealed decades ago. The anger was there, solid and hot, but underneath it was something she hadn't expected. Relief. She'd said the things she'd been carrying for 18 months, and the sky hadn't fallen, and the cabin was still standing. And June was still following the creek with her notebook. And Patrice's disapproval didn't have the power it used to have, because Patrice didn't have anything Cora needed anymore. That relief lasted exactly 4 days. They came on a Thursday. Cora heard the engines before she saw the vehicles. The sound wrong for this road, too smooth, too expensive. The purr of machines designed for highways rather than dirt tracks through Ozark forest. Two SUVs, both black, both rental clean, grinding up the track with the cautious speed of people who didn't trust the road. Garland was out of the first one before it fully stopped, his face already flushed with the particular shade of red that meant he'd been angry for the entire drive and had been saving it. Patrice emerged from the second vehicle, smoothing her jacket, followed by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase and a woman with a camera bag over one shoulder. June was on the porch drawing in her notebook, and she looked up at the vehicles. The way a deer looks up at an unfamiliar sound, completely still assessing whether to run or hold position. Go inside, Bug. No. June. I'm staying. She closed the notebook and stood up, and Cora recognized the set of her jaw, the same expression Cora saw in the mirror when she was done backing down from something. Garland took the porch steps two at a time, heavy, proprietary, like he was entering a building he already owned. So this is what all the fuss is about, a log cabin in the middle of nowhere. He looked around the clearing with the practiced dismissal of a man who sold cars for a living and knew how to make something seem worth less than it was. Thea always was out of her mind. Get off my porch, Garland. Your porch. He laughed short and hard. Since when do you own anything, Cora? Last I heard, you couldn't even keep an apartment. The man in the suit came up the steps with a smoother approach, his hand extended, his smile preloaded. Miss Ledbetter, I'm Gerald Thorne, attorney at law. I represent your siblings in this matter. Cora didn't take his hand. What matter? The matter of your great-aunt's estate and the appropriate distribution of her assets. Thorne's briefcase clicked open with the sound of something rehearsed. My clients have concerns about your capacity to manage a substantial inheritance given your recent history of housing instability and financial hardship. We're filing a petition for guardianship. The word guardianship hit the air between them and changed its temperature. Not guardianship of the estate. Guardianship of Cora. The legal mechanism that says a person cannot manage their own affairs, that someone else needs to make decisions for them, that they are, in the language of the court, incapacitated. Patrice was coming up the steps now, her face arranged into an expression of careful worry that Cora had seen her practice in mirrors before open houses. Cora, we are not trying to hurt you. We are concerned. This cabin, this isolation, it's not healthy for June. A child needs structure, community, proper schooling. We just want what's best for everyone. You want what's under the cabin. June's voice cut through from behind Cora, clear and high and shaking with something that wasn't fear. You didn't want what was best for us when we were in the parking lot. You didn't call. You didn't write. You didn't come. She stepped forward until she was standing next to Cora, small and rigid, her notebook clutched against her chest like a shield. Aunt Thea left it to us because Mom is a good person. You're not good people. Good people don't take someone's money and then pretend they don't exist. The silence after that was the kind that has edges. Garland's flush deepened. Patrice's careful expression flickered. Thorne glanced at the woman with the camera who had been shooting the entire exchange, and Cora realized with a cold drop in her stomach that this was choreographed. The concerned family members, the attorney, the photographer documenting the confrontation. They were building a case in real time, manufacturing evidence of instability by provoking a reaction. Cora put her hand on June's shoulder, felt the tension vibrating through her daughter's body, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into air that might or might not hold her. You have 30 seconds to get off my property before I call the sheriff. Thorne extended a stack of papers, thick-bound official. These are copies of our petition. You'll be served formally within 48 hours. I'd strongly suggest retaining counsel, though, given your financial situation. 20 seconds. Garland leaned close, his breath stale with coffee, and the specific sourness of a man who believed he was owed things. This isn't over, Cora, not even close. When we're done, you won't just lose the money, you'll lose her. He tilted his head toward June. A judge is going to look at a mother who let her kid sleep in a car for a year and a half and draw the obvious conclusion. Cora's hand tightened on June's shoulder. The fear was instant and total, a cold flood that started in her chest and spread outward until her fingers went numb. Not the money. She could lose the money and survive. She'd been broke before, knew how to be broke, had the calluses to prove it. But June. The suggestion that a court could take her daughter, could decide that homeless meant unfit, that poverty meant incompetence, that the worst 18 months of her life could be used to erase everything she'd done to keep her child safe and fed and enrolled in school, and believing in the possibility of something better. That fear was a different species entirely. 10 seconds. They left. The SUVs reversed down the track in a spray of gravel and dust, and the sound of their engines faded into the trees, and the clearing went quiet again. except for the birds and the creek and Cora's heartbeat hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. June pressed into her sidearms around Cora's waist, holding on the way she'd held on in the back seat of the Malibu during the worst nights. The nights when the temperature dropped and the engine wouldn't start, and the world felt like it was actively trying to crush them. They can't take me. Right, Mom? They can't actually take me away from you. Cora looked down at her daughter and told her the truth. Because June had earned the truth by being brave enough to stand on that porch and say what needed saying. I don't know, Bug, but I'm going to make sure they don't. She called Eugenia Falk from the cabin's landline, a rotary phone that Thea had maintained for decades, and Eugenia said 3 words that changed the next 6 weeks of Cora's life. I know people. Marguerite Delacroix arrived 2 days later. 50s dark hair streaked with silver, a suit that cost more than the Malibu and eyes that catalogued everything in a room within seconds of entering it. She specialized in estate law for high-value individuals, and she spoke about legal strategy the way Thea's journals spoke about geological formations in layers, with an understanding of pressure and time. Warren Goss came with her. 40's calm in the way of a man who'd stood in front of enough judges to know that panic was a liability, and his specialty was defending against exactly what Garland and Patrice were attempting. Frivolous guardianship petitions brought by family members seeking access to assets they had no legal claim to. They sat around Dorothea's kitchen table, the 4 of them, and Cora laid out everything. The insurance money, the 18 months in the car, the phone calls that went to voicemail, the petition Thorne had delivered, the threat Garland had made about June. She didn't soften any of it, didn't minimize or dramatize, just reported the facts the way she'd reported patient vitals during her years as a CNA, clear and accurate and detached enough to be useful. Marguerite took notes in a leather portfolio without interrupting. When Cora finished, she closed the portfolio and folded her hands on top of it. First, we establish a trust. Everything in that chamber goes into it immediately with you as sole trustee and June as sole beneficiary. Even if they convince a court you need a guardian, which they absolutely will not, the trust protects the assets independently. They can't touch it. And June, Warren leaned forward. They have no standing for custody. You're not neglectful, you're not abusive, you're not impaired. Being poor isn't a crime, and it isn't grounds for removal. Every judge in this state knows that. But he paused in a way that made Cora's stomach tighten. They can make the process painful. Depositions, psychological evaluations, home studies, media attention. They can drag this out for months and turn your life into a public spectacle while they do it. How do we stop them? We don't stop them from filing. They've already filed. We stop them from winning. And then we make sure they pay for every hour of our time they wasted. The next 2 weeks compressed into a rhythm of preparation. Medical evaluation in Springfield, a psychologist who spent 3 hours with Cora and pronounced her competent, resilient, and demonstrating no signs of impaired judgment. The doctor's exact words in her report. Ms. Ledbetter has maintained her daughter's physical and emotional health through circumstances that would have overwhelmed many individuals with significantly more resources. Her capacity for clear thinking under pressure is frankly remarkable. Financial records assembled documenting every dollar her siblings had taken, the original loan amounts, the texts asking for repayment, the read receipts with no responses, the voicemails that went unanswered. A paper trail of theft dressed up as family obligation. Character references gathered from people Cora hadn't even asked. Sister Carmen drove from Springfield with a written statement. June's former teacher sent a letter. The director of the Y, where Cora had volunteered in exchange for shower access, submitted a deposition. And Briar Hollow did something Cora hadn't anticipated. The town closed around them the way a hand closes around something it wants to protect. Not dramatically, not with speeches or public declarations, but in the quiet Ozark way of showing up without being asked. Dale Jessup from the general store drove his truck up the track every Tuesday and Thursday, with boxes of groceries, and refused payment so consistently that Cora stopped offering. Doc Reeves came out to examine June and wrote a detailed report about her health, her reading level, her emotional stability, the kind of report that would make a judge think very carefully before suggesting this child needed to be removed from her mother's care. The mechanic in eminence serviced the Malibu and left an invoice that said, paid in handwriting that wasn't Cora's. Hazel organized it, not openly, not with meetings or sign-up sheets, but through the same Limestone Channel information network that had leaked the news in the first place. She made phone calls. She stopped by houses. She mentioned things to people who mentioned them to other people. And the result was a community that had decided collectively and without discussion that Thea's people were their people, and outside threats would be met with the particular stubbornness that Ozark towns had been perfecting since before the Civil War. Sheriff Del Tackett came by the cabin on the third week, not in response to a call, but because he'd heard the way everyone heard everything in Shannon County, that Cora's family had shown up with lawyers and cameras. He walked the property with her, noting the condition of the cabin, the quality of June's living environment, the solar panels and the well, and the fully stocked pantry. Professional, thorough documenting everything in a way that would hold up in a report. It was Tackett who found the GPS tracker. He'd been checking underneath the Malibu as part of his assessment flashlight, sweeping the undercarriage with the practiced eye of someone who'd been in law enforcement for 20 plus years, when he stopped and went quiet in a way that made Cora's chest tighten. Miss Ledbetter, when did your siblings visit? 11 days ago. Tackett slid out from under the car, holding a small black device between his thumb and forefinger, about the size of a matchbox with a magnetic backing and a tiny green light blinking once every few seconds. He held it up so Cora could see it, and his expression was the expression of a man who just found something that made his job both simpler and more personal. GPS tracker, commercial grade. Someone wants to know where you go. He bagged it in an evidence pouch from his cruiser, labeled it, photographed its position under the car, and wrote everything in his report with the slow, careful handwriting of a man who wanted this particular document to be unimpeachable. That's felony stalking in Missouri. I'll have this in the county attorney's file by morning. He handed Cora his card with his personal cell number written on the back. Anything happens, day or night, you call me directly. Your family just handed us evidence. That evening after Tackett left, and the light faded from the ridgeline, and June was upstairs documenting the tracker incident in her notebook, with the factual precision of a court reporter, Cora went down to the chamber alone. She sat at Thea's desk in the beam of the flashlight and read the letter again. The part about siblings coming about, standing firm, about blood versus character, and felt Thea's presence in the room like a temperature, constant and cool and older than the rock walls surrounding them. She opened the financial ledger to the last page, the one with the total, let the number settle into her mind for the second time. $198 million. Built by a woman who'd lived alone in these woods for 53 years, who'd bought Walmart stock when Walmart was a store in Arkansas, and Apple stock when Apple was a company in a garage, who'd collected minerals from the caves she explored, and art from estate sales she attended in disguise, and built all of it into something so large it was almost a geological itself, a formation created by patience and time and pressure. And she'd left it to Cora, not to the siblings who took, to the one who gave. Cora pressed her palm flat against the stone desk and made the same promise she'd made to June on the porch. She would not let them win. She would not let Garland's anger or Patrice's calculations or any courtroom theater take what Thea had spent a lifetime building and decided Cora deserved. She was closing the ledger when she noticed something she'd missed the first time. A small drawer in the desk's underside fitted so precisely. It was invisible unless you ran your fingers along the seam, which Cora did now, because Thea had taught her through the trillium stone and the hidden stairs that surfaces in this cabin were never the whole story. Inside the drawer, a VHS tape in a cardboard sleeve, a brass key on a leather cord, and a folded note in Thea's shaky hand. If they've come for what's yours, play this tape. Show it in court when they think they're winning. I recorded it knowing exactly what would happen. I've been watching them longer than you know. Cora held the tape in both hands and stared at the handwritten label on the spine. Dorothea A. Ledbetter, recorded January 14th, 8 months before her death. She climbed the stairs and sealed the floor behind her, and stood in the cabin's main room with the tape pressed against her chest next to the letter. The accumulated weight of a dead woman's foresight, heavy enough to feel like armor. On the mantel, the three pressed trilliums caught the firelight through their glass frames. Three white flowers that only bloomed in shade, preserved by a woman who understood that the most important things grow where nobody thinks to look. Upstairs, June's voice drifted down, already half asleep. Mom, are we going to be okay? Cora looked at the tape in her hands, looked at the fire, looked at the three flowers on the mantel that a 93-year-old woman had pressed and framed, and hung where her chosen heir would see them every night. Yeah, Bug, we are going to be okay. But she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire and held the tape and thought about courtrooms and judges and the careful cruelty of people who shared her blood, but not her character. And she waited for morning when she'd call Marguerite and Warren and begin the process of ending what her siblings had started. Because somewhere on that tape, Thea's voice was waiting. And Cora had learned in 3 weeks in this cabin that Thea never left anything to chance. Nolan called at 11 at night, 3 days before the hearing. Cora was sitting at the kitchen table with Marguerite's case files spread in front of her, memorizing dates and dollar amounts, and the sequence of events that had turned her family into opposing parties in a courtroom, when the landline rang with the jarring mechanical bell that rotary phones use instead of polite electronic chirps. She almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar numbers had meant reporters and financial advisors and strangers with opinions for the past 3 weeks. But something made her pick up some instinct she couldn't name, and Nolan's voice came through the line, sounding like a man who hadn't slept in days. Cora, don't hang up. She didn't hang up. She also didn't speak. The silence between them had weight and texture, 18 months of unanswered calls compressed into a few seconds of open line. I withdrew my name from the petition this morning. I told Garland and Patrice I'm done. Why now? Because I finally looked at what I was doing and couldn't pretend it was something else. His voice cracked along a seam that sounded old, like it had been weakening for a long time and was only just now giving way. We stole from you. I stole from you. I took $12,000 and told myself it was a loan. And then I stopped answering your calls because hearing your voice made me feel like what I am, which is a thief who robbed his own sister. Cora pressed her forehead against the cool wood of Thea's table and closed her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I need you to know something about what's happening. Nolan's voice dropped the way people's voices drop when they're saying things they know will have consequences. Garland borrowed $90,000 to pay Thorne's firm. Interest rate you wouldn't believe. He's betting everything on winning this case because he's already leveraged to the roof on the dealership. Patrice sold her condo in Tulsa to fund her share of the legal costs. They're not just greedy, Cora. They're desperate. And desperate people don't stop until someone makes them. Are you telling me this to help me or to feel better about yourself? Both. probably more the second one. A long exhale. Thea was right about us. About all of us except you. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. She watched us for decades and she knew exactly who we were. And she left everything to the one person who didn't deserve what we did to her. I can't undo that, but I can stop being part of it. I hung up without saying goodbye, and Cora sat in the quiet cabin and let the information settle the way sediment settles in creek water slowly, until what was underneath became visible. The Shannon County Courthouse occupied the center of eminence like a tooth in a jaw. Limestone block construction from the 1930s, solid and plain, and built by people who thought buildings should look like they meant what they said. Cora walked up the steps at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, with June's hand in her left, and Marguerite's case filer in her right, and she felt every step in her knees, because her body had decided independently of her mind that this was the most frightening thing she'd ever done. June wore the best clothes they had, which meant clean jeans and a button-down shirt. Hazel had brought over the day before tags still on exactly June's size left on the porch without a note. She carried her notebook in her free hand. She hadn't let go of it all morning. Inside the hallway, smelled like lemon polish and old paper, and the particular anxiety that courthouses accumulate from decades of people bringing their worst problems through the doors. Garland stood near the water fountain in a suit that didn't fit right through the shoulders, his face carrying the permanent flush of a man running on anger and borrowed money. Patrice was next to him. Navy dress hair pinned her expression set to concerned sister. A performance so polished, it was almost convincing if you didn't know the woman underneath. Nolan was not there. His absence made a shape in the hallway that everyone noticed and nobody mentioned. Gerald Thorne conferred with an associate near the courtroom doors, both of them carrying the thick files that lawyers carry when they want judges to think there's substance behind the volume. The photographer from the cabin visit was notably absent. Someone had made a strategic decision that cameras in a courtroom would look predatory rather than concerned. Briar Hollow came to fill the benches. Hazel in the front row, her back straight, her blue eyes fixed on the judge's bench, with the steady patience of a woman who'd spent 40 years sitting in these hills waiting for things to come right. Dale Jessup from the general store, still in his work jacket because he'd driven straight from opening. Doc Reeves with his medical report in a manila folder on his lap. Sheriff Tackett in full uniform, his evidence report filed and entered into the record. The GPS tracker's documentation sitting in the county attorney's office, like a grenade with the pin half pulled. Sister Carmen had driven 3 hours from Springfield. She sat in the second row with her hands folded and her reading glasses on their chain. And when Cora caught her eye, she nodded once. Not encouragement, recognition, the acknowledgement of one woman who'd seen 1,000 broken situations toward another, who was about to prove that broken didn't mean finished. Judge Eleanor Greer entered at 9 sharp. Silver hair, black robe, an expression that suggested she had a low tolerance for theater and a high tolerance for facts. She settled behind the bench, arranged her papers, and looked at both sides of the aisle with eyes that had been weighing people for 30 years and had gotten very good at finding them light. Thorne presented first. Smooth practiced his concern for Cora's welfare, so carefully constructed it sounded almost genuine. He walked the judge through a narrative that was technically accurate and emotionally dishonest. The homelessness, the gap in employment, the remote cabin without municipal services, a child living miles from the nearest town, a woman with no financial experience suddenly responsible for an estate of extraordinary value. He called Garland to the stand, and Garland performed the worried brother with enough conviction to earn a callback in community theater, describing years of trying to help a sister who wouldn't accept guidance of watching her spiral, of finally deciding that intervention was the only responsible choice. Patrice followed with the softer notes, more manipulative in its gentleness. She spoke about June, about her niece's welfare, about the trauma of homelessness, and the long-term damage of instability. Her voice caught at moments she'd rehearsed tears arriving on schedule. She made it sound like removing June from Cora's care was an act of love rather than a strategy for accessing $198 million. Warren Goss dismantled it with the patience of a man pulling stitches from a wound. He presented the financial records first. 12,000 from Nolan, 18,000 from Garland, 14,000 from Patrice, 20,000 from combined requests over 18 months. $64,000 in total taken from a woman who'd given it because she believed in something her siblings didn't have. Text messages requesting repayment, each one time stamped. Read receipts with no responses. A voicemail from Garland played through the courtroom speakers, his voice slurred and dismissive. Stop calling me about the money, Cora. You gave it to us. That's not a loan, that's a gift. Get over it. The GPS tracker evidence came next. Tackett's report, thorough and unimpeachable, documenting the device, its placement, its commercial grade, and the felony stalking charge it represented. Garland's face went from performance red to genuine white. The medical evaluation. The psychologist's report read into the record, every sentence a brick in a wall Thorne couldn't climb. Dr. Reeves took the stand and described June's health, her reading level, her emotional regulation, the adjustment she'd made from parking lot to cabin with an adaptability that spoke directly to the quality of parenting she'd received. Sister Carmen's testimony cut the courtroom open. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture, just sat in the witness chair with her hands folded and spoke about Cora the way you speak about someone you've watched survive something that should have destroyed them. She came to us 18 months ago asking for one thing. Not a bed, not money, an address, a mailing address, so she could apply for jobs. Because no employer takes you seriously when your return address is a parking lot. She maintained her daughter's school enrollment through 3 district transfers. She maintained her daughter's health through free clinic visits she scheduled around shelter meal times, so she wouldn't take food from women who needed it more. And she volunteered at our shelter while homeless, because she said other women had it worse and she wanted to help. Sister Carmen paused and looked directly at Garland and Patrice. Using that woman's worst 18 months as evidence that she's unfit to raise her own child is the cruelest thing I've seen in 30 years of working with families in crisis. Judge Greer's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A calibration, the small internal adjustment of a person who's been presented with enough evidence to know which way this goes. I'd like to hear from Ms. Ledbetter. The judge looked at Cora, and from June, if she's willing. Cora took the stand the way she had taken the first step down into Thea's cave, scared and steady and unwilling to stop. The questions were direct. Why had she been homeless? What happened with the insurance money? How was she managing the inheritance? What were her plans? She answered all of it without editing, without self-pity, without the careful positioning her siblings had used. Yes, she'd lived in a car. Yes, she'd trusted her family, and they'd stolen from her. Yes, the past 18 months had been the worst of her life. And yes, she'd kept June alive and healthy, and in school through all of it. Not because she was exceptional, but because that's what mothers did. They kept going. They figured it out. They found a way even when there wasn't one. Your siblings say you lack the capacity to manage this estate. My great aunt didn't think so. She watched all of us for decades and she chose me. Not because I was the smartest or the most qualified, but because she trusted my character. I'm not managing this alone. I have attorneys and financial advisors and a community that showed up for me when my own family wouldn't. But the trust is in my name because that's what Thea wanted, and I'm going to honor that. June walked to the witness stand when the judge called her name, and Cora watched her daughter cross the courtroom floor with her notebook held against her chest, and her chin level, and her eyes dry and clear. And she felt something in her chest that was too large for the word pride, and too complicated for any other word she knew. June, do you understand why we're here today? Yes, ma'am. My uncle and aunt want to take our home and say my mom can't take care of me. Tell me about your mother. June was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, organizing. The way she organized her maps, putting things in the right order, so the picture made sense. When we lived in the car, Mom always gave me the bigger half of whatever we had. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. She walked me to the bus stop every morning and made sure my clothes were clean and my homework was done and I got to school on time. She never missed a day, not one day in 18 months. June's voice held steady, but her hands were tight on the notebook. She taught me to read maps so I'd always know where I was. She taught me to measure things so I'd always know what was real. She kept me safe in a parking lot, and she's keeping me safe in a cabin. And she'll keep me safe wherever we go because that's who she is. Your aunt and uncle say they're worried about you. June looked at Garland and Patrice for the first time since taking the stand. And her gaze was the gaze of a child who had learned too young to tell the difference between people who meant what they said and people who were performing. They weren't worried when we were cold. They weren't worried when Mom called them crying. They're worried now because there's money, but it's not their money. Aunt Thea left it to us because she knew. June opened her notebook to a page near the back and removed a folded piece of paper. She wrote me a letter before I was even born. She wrote, "Protect your mother. She spent her whole life protecting you." June refolded the letter and held it in both hands. That's what I'm doing. The courtroom was silent in the particular way that courtrooms go silent when something has happened that everyone recognizes as the moment the case turned. Then Marguerite stood and rolled a television card to the center of the floor. Your Honor, Dorothea Ledbetter recorded this 8 months before her death. She left instructions that it should only be shown if her heirs face legal challenge from family members. The screen flickered. Gray static resolved into the image of a woman sitting at the oak desk in the underground chamber. Minerals and paintings visible on the shelves behind her. Thea was thin and white-haired and somewhere past 90, but her eyes were the eyes of a person who had spent half a century looking at things other people walked over without noticing, and they were sharp and certain and aimed directly at the lens. My name is Dorothea Ann Ledbetter. Today is January 14th. I am 93 years old and I am of sound mind and body, as my physician and attorney will attest. I am recording this because I know what's coming. Her voice was rough with age but carried the precision of a woman who'd spent decades teaching graduate seminars and had never lost the habit of speaking clearly. I have watched Cora's siblings for 40 years. Garland takes what isn't nailed down and borrows against what is. Patrice calculates the value of every relationship and discards the ones that don't pay out. They took their father's insurance money from Cora because they knew she'd give it and they never intended to return a cent. When they learn about this inheritance, they will come. They will claim concern. They will claim family. They will file papers and hire lawyers and say, Cora is incapable. Thea leaned slightly forward and the camera caught the light in her eyes, steady as creek water over a stone. She's the most capable person in that family. She kept a child alive and healthy through homelessness without losing her dignity or her decency. That takes more strength than anything Garland or Patrice have ever attempted. She straightened. Her hand rested on the journal on the page with the number on the accounting of 53 years. This collection is mine. I built it with my hands and my mind and my patience. I leave it to Cora Ledbetter and her daughter Juniper, because they are the only members of my family who understand that value isn't what you take, it's what you grow, slowly, in the dark, where nobody thinks to look. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something that wasn't anger or contempt, but the exhausted clarity of a scientist presenting her final findings. Blood doesn't make family. Character does, and character is the one thing my other nieces and nephews never had enough of to bother cultivating. The screen went to static. The courtroom stayed silent for 3 full seconds, which in a room full of lawyers is an eternity. Judge Greer picked up her gavel. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of someone delivering conclusions they'd reached long before the final piece of evidence arrived. I have heard from professionals, from community members, from the mother and child at the center of this case. I have reviewed financial records, medical evaluations, law enforcement reports, and the recorded testimony of the deceased. I find no basis whatsoever for this petition. She looked at Garland and Patrice the way geography looks at weather, patient and immovable and fundamentally unimpressed. You stole $64,000 from your sister. You abandoned her during the worst period of her life. You placed an illegal tracking device on her vehicle. And you have the nerve to stand in my courtroom and claim she lacks judgment. The gavel came down. Petition denied. Petitioners will pay all legal costs incurred by the respondent. Any further contact with Miss Ledbetter or her daughter outside the presence of counsel will result in a restraining order. This case is closed. Garland's mouth opened and closed. Patrice stared at the blank television screen as if Thea might reappear and take it back. Thorne gathered his papers with the speed of a man calculating how quickly he could distance himself from a losing case. Cora pulled June into her arms and held on, and June held back. And they stood in the middle of the courtroom, while Briar Hollow's benches emptied around them, in a quiet tide of people who touched Cora's arm or squeezed her shoulder, or simply nodded as they passed, which in the Ozarks was the same as applause. 3 years later, the building that sat adjacent to the cabin bore a name carved into a limestone lintel by a stonemason from Eminence who donated his time, the Dorothea Ledbetter Foundation. Timber frame construction, local oak, designed to look like it had grown from the same hillside as the cabin. Inside the rooms served purposes Thea could have predicted, but probably hadn't imagined in their specifics. Legal aid office, job training classroom, counseling rooms with windows facing the ridgeline, emergency housing in 12 tiny homes arranged along the creek. Each one with a porch and a wood stove and enough space for a mother and her children to breathe without counting the cost. 412 women in 3 years. Not a number designed to impress donors. A real count documented each one, a name and a story and a set of circumstances that had brought them to a cabin in the Ozarks, where someone understood what they were going through, because she'd been through it herself. June was 11 now, taller. Her voice had changed not in pitch, but in confidence, the way a creek changes when it finds a deeper channel. She helped run the youth program on weekends, teaching kids to read topographic maps and identify birds and measure things with string. The same skills Thea had valued, and Cora had taught her, and that she was now passing forward to children who needed to know that paying attention to the world was a kind of power nobody could take from you. Hazel came every Saturday with the stew, 81 years old, still in rubber boots, still sharp. She'd become the unofficial grandmother of the foundation. The person mothers talked to when they needed someone who'd listen without offering solutions, which was its own kind of medicine. On a Tuesday evening in October, 3 years and some months after they'd first turned the key in the cabin's front door, Cora and June sat on the porch in the last light. The ridge was going purple the way it did every evening. The oaks and hickories dark against a sky that faded from gold to violet in increments too slow to watch, but too beautiful to ignore. June had her notebook open, not the old one, which was full and shelved next to Thea's journals inside. A new one. She'd been drawing a map of the foundation grounds, every building and path and planting bed rendered with the same precision she'd brought to her imaginary countries in the back seat of the Malibu. Except this map was real. Every line corresponded to something that existed. Something she could walk to and touch, something that was helping people in ways she could see and count. Between the pages, pressed flat and held in place by a square of wax paper, was a trillium. White. 3 petals. Fresh picked that morning from the shaded slope behind the cabin where they grew in clusters so thick the forest floor looked dusted with snow. The first one she'd pressed herself. Mom. Yeah, bug. Aunt Thea's trilliums in the frames on the mantel. I counted the growth rings on the stems under the magnifying glass. The oldest one is from 1971. That's the year she moved here. So she pressed her first one right at the beginning. And she kept pressing them for 53 years. June smoothed the wax paper over her specimen with careful fingers. I'm going to do the same thing, one every year. So someday, a long time from now, someone can open this notebook and see how long we were here. The creek made its sound below the ridge water, over limestone, the same sound it had made before Thea came and would make long after June's notebook filled up and someone else's began. The foundation's windows glowed warm against the darkening trees. Inside, the mother, who'd arrived last week, was making dinner for her 2 sons in one of the tiny homes. And the sounds of her pots and her children's voices carried across the clearing mixed with birdsong and the slow tick of the forest settling into evening. Mom, are we happy, like the kind where you stop checking if it's going to disappear? Cora looked at the ridge, at the cabin, at the light from the foundation spilling soft and steady through the trees, at her daughter, 11 years old, pressing a white flower into a notebook, with hands that were steady and sure, and building something that would last. Yeah, bug, that kind. June closed the notebook. The trillium held its shape between the pages, 3 petals preserved in the dark, the way the best things always are, quietly, without anyone watching. Growing where the light doesn't reach because that's where the ground is richest and the roots go deepest and the bloom. When it finally comes means something that sunlight flowers never have to learn. If someone once told you that you weren't capable, that you couldn't handle your own life, that you needed someone else to make your decisions, tell us about it in the comments. And if you know a mother who needs to hear this story tonight, share this video. Sometimes the thing that saves us is knowing we're not the only one.